Good afternoon. I'll call this meeting to order. Please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Let's move on to public comments. Mr. Doyle.
We have one public commenter, Mr. Chair. How much time can we allow?
Let's do 3 minutes. That's good.
3 minutes. Our first and only speaker is Julie Buckley, who will discuss SPLOST 5 funds for Nickajack Elementary.
Hi, my name is Julie Buckley. I'm a parent at Nickajack Elementary. I have a 4th grader and a 2nd grader in the dual immersion program. And I just want to thank Ms. Thayer for everything you do for our community. You're very well appreciated in Smyrna, and thank you for your service and what you do for us. It is no secret to anyone in this room that Smyrna is growing, and it's no secret to anyone in this room that Nickajack is growing. You will recall that this year we added 4 portables to our campus that are housing 4 4th grade homerooms at present. But what we have felt at the school council level, which I'm a member of, is something that it just felt like we were busting at the seams. And we thought to ourselves, you know what, let's do some research and dig a little deeper and find out if this is true. And we found out some really interesting statistics, and that's why I'm here today. I wanted to share it with you. The Nickajack building code capacity is 1,025 people. Today, there are 1,155 students in the building and 136 staff members in the building, which means that today and every day, the Nickajack building is 25% over capacity. Whoa, that really wowed us when we saw that. So what we did for you guys is we put together some other facts and figures that we found. Now, this is not official economic math. This is math of people that have dug together some figures. So with full discrepancy, if you find an error, please share it with us. But this is what we have here. If you take a minute to look it over, spend some time with it today, we would sincerely appreciate it. We've got a couple of other ancillary issues, but on page 2, what we're really requesting is the most significant issue, and that is consideration within SPLOST 5 for some permanent additional classroom space to bring everyone back in the building today within building code, and to allow space for the future students that we anticipate we'll be seeing in the next 5 to 10 years. And that's why I'm here, and that's what I have for you guys. Thanks for your consideration, and Ms. Thayer, I'm happy to follow up with you afterwards if you have additional questions. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Next, we have the approval of the minutes from the August 16th board meeting. If there are no objections to approval, they are approved. We are ready to go with board business, and let's begin with item 9, annual board governance training program or plan. The board is required to develop and submit a local board training plan to the Georgia Department of Education each year. You each had the opportunity and chance to review the proposed plan. If there are no objections, we'll consider that approved, 7-0. Item 2, board meeting date change. The January 24th, 2019 is going to be changed to January 17th, 2019. And number 3 is Facilities and Tech Oversight Committee report. Mr. Scamahorn, are you ready with that?
I think so. Thank you, Mr. Chair. The August 28, 2018 committee meeting was canceled due to lack of interest. Due to lack of any board agenda items requiring SPLOST expenditures. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Scamahorn. And our last item of board business is communication norms in schools. Mr. Morgan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good afternoon to everyone. Yeah, I appreciate that, brother. I appreciate it. You the only one said it. The rest of them heard me, didn't say one word. So I appreciate you. I appreciate the opportunity to bring forth this board agenda item. One of the rewarding things for me, having a daughter who's now a middle schooler in one of our schools, is I get a more intimate dive into the day-to-day at a school as a parent, as an engaged parent, an involved parent. Let me say that. And there are some things that I've experienced that I want to share with the board, superintendent, and the staff, and would love your feedback. And that particular thing that I want to share today is communication as it relates to let me just say communication. And there are 3 different segments that I want to cover. The first one that I want to cover would be teacher to parent communication. In this regard, my daughter has math, science, social studies, English language arts, and chorus. Okay. The math teacher, when I went to open house, she said that she was going to communicate with parents through Remind. And I have found that to work seamlessly, whether it's homework, whether she wants to get a message to us. It's a quick text message. It comes straight to your phone. Voila. It's no guesswork. And you could text the teacher right back if you do have some discrepancy. Another one of our teachers said that he communicates with parents through Class Dojo. Another one of the teachers said that she communicates through email. And one teacher said that her children are grown and out the house, and that the best way to communicate with her is call her. Now, that in addition to blogs, that's a lot trying to remember, okay, which one did this teacher said, and trying to remember that. So my first question is, what are the impediments or what are the possibilities of just having, and I'm not talking about every school does it the same way. I'm asking, what's the possibility or what are the impediments to saying, okay, if you're at Lindley 6th Grade Academy, this is the platform in which we communicate. So as a parent, I don't have to be trying to keep up with 3 or 4 different, email. Am I supposed to call her? Is it Remind? Is it possible to just have a simplistic way of saying, this is what we use at school X, parents, this is how we will communicate to you? So I will stop right there to see if there are any possibilities or what impediments I might not know to make something like that happen.
So I'll take it first. You bring up a great point. I think there's a little bit of qualifying to be done in my mind because, like, for example, Remind is kind of an overlay to the communication that you're talking about. Like, if Remind might be a text that says, we got a test, don't forget chapter 3 test tomorrow,
right,
kind of stuff,
right,
versus The blog is probably where the teacher is communicating via postings of homework assignments, resources, those kind of things. Right. So you bring up an excellent point. And it is something that we have thought of and that we have not taken significant action toward to this date. Because to your point, that of one student with 5 different teachers and so many things you just listed. So what we're doing is we're gearing up to look at this from a district perspective. And I think the best way to explain it is kind of when we went with the interactive whiteboards way back in the day. We did give some choices, but the choices were, okay, school A, you have these choices available, but you have to make it for the entire school. So it's not like Hall 500 is going to be one choice and 600 Hall is going to be a different choice. So we're going to, we're certainly open to that, and we, like I said, we have been looking into this from the CTLS perspective, because once CTLS Parent gets rolled out, and you have CTLS Teach and CTLS Parent both, and parents are hitting that platform, it makes a lot of sense. To have whatever communication method is standardized, to go through that. Now, that being said, we all know, just like cell phones, some people like Apple, some people like Samsung, some people don't like them at all. But so those are some, to your point, some impediments to work through, not necessarily impossibilities, just working through, okay, what features are non-negotiable for whatever platform that might be, and then given enough runway for teachers and parents and schools and principals and communities to get accustomed to, okay, here's how this is going to work. But I think you bring up an excellent point, and it's something that we do need to address. So I appreciate you bringing it up and lighting the fire as you so appropriately do a lot of times. I try to give you a shout out, but that's
I
as far as I could go, man.
I appreciate it. I appreciate that. You're right. Long and hard.
Thank you, Mr. Morgan. Mr. Sweeney?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I actually really appreciate that Mr. Morgan brought this up. This morning, my son participates in a little bit of a rideshare program. He has a parking pass. The parking's in pretty high demand at the school, so he gives some students rides into class, school rather. But one of the people in his rideshare program shared that he actually one of the teachers had sent an assignment via phone, some text message, I believe, or email at 6 p.m. for an assignment that was due at 7 a.m. in the morning. And apparently it was a fairly heavy workload, and this person happens to be very engaged in some extracurricular activities as well. And then even said is that, I know a lot of people that, the family shares a computer and they're not on it all the time. And so some of the people clearly would have missed that notification, hence the deadline that was imposed on very, very short notice. So, to Mr. Morgan's point, it's not just the communication, but it's also the timing of the communication that I think needs to be addressed as well.
Ms. Thayer, Mr. Morgan's next.
And I love hearing the comments. One of the things I hope we don't miss, though, is teachers are trying to communicate with parents, and we appreciate that. And just like we communicate in a variety of modes, particularly with what it is we need to convey, I think we don't need to get too narrow. Again, I think we just need to strongly encourage communication and have some maybe systematic things, but again, I don't want anyone to think that the board does not sincerely appreciate the fact that our teachers are making every effort and doing a better job than probably ever before in communicating with parents. So.
Yeah, let me respond to that. Definitely, it's nail on the head about. I don't think anybody has remarks that are meant to be disparaging in any way, but I think the point that's being brought up is that it's incumbent upon us to make it as efficient and effective as possible for teachers to do that, because basically the blogs, anybody can correct me if I'm wrong here, the blogs have been just kind of willy-nilly, if you will, because we don't have a standardized blog from a district perspective that's been paid for by district funds. If I had to guess, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think most of the blogs are pretty much free that are being utilized to some degree. John?
Yeah, I think the superintendent's speaking to it well. It's communication space in 2018 is complicated because there's so many options, right? I mean, just think about your own personal life. You can be communicated with email, text, social media. Asking our teachers to communicate across all communication channels is, as Ms. Thayer echoed, is not what we're looking for. We are trying to make that communication streamlined for our parents and for our students. And so, to the superintendent's point, currently our teachers have been trying to communicate, and they've been using whatever tools have been available to them, which means there have been many tools inside of each building. And I think what we can do as a priority and as a value statement is to say, we can take a long look at standardizing that per building. We don't want to make the choice about what the very best communication channel and method might be for the entire district. The reality is it's probably different for an elementary school and for a middle school and for a high school. But we can say that inside of each building, as a parent, you can know what to expect and how you be communicated with, whether that is a blog or whether that is social media or whether it's another communication channel that's most effective for that building.
Mr. Morgan? Mr. Scanlon? Go ahead.
You sure? Yeah, everybody's good. Thank you, Mr. Morgan. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to piggyback or also echo some things that, like Ms. Thayer said. My last 3 years as an administrator, when we had to communicate, excuse me, with parents, like we had about 5 different ways we had to go out with a single message. We had phones, or phone blasts as they were called then, may have changed, email, letters, texts, and it takes time. So I commend Mr. Morgan for looking at it, but the other side of that coin too is what parents have to receive those messages. That's really why we have to send it out in a multi-layered method. And I don't even know I assume phone blasts go to cell phones. I don't know. They do, John? Okay. But just listing here, cell phones, landlines, which some folks still have, emails, blogs, letters, or individual notes, although some of those don't get to the parents, text messaging, also personal messages or meetings, personal meetings, a parent if they need, Facebook or social media, which John explained. So there's if I could use the word plethora of ways to communicate. So I think we need to be careful how we standardize, or if we can standardize, which I support, but I don't know how we can do it. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Morgan.
Yeah, again, I think too, we need to talk about exactly what you said. The standardization, I do not anticipate us being able to standardize from a district perspective. There are too many nuances at the various levels and perhaps at various schools that would make that difficult, if not impossible, to do, and that's not something we're trying to do. Also, let me put another twist on this. Let's not forget, and I'm going to give you another shout out there, Mr. Morgan, but let's not forget that what we're talking about is a platform for those parents that are engaged, that are actively involved in their students' academic life, that are being communicated with. I'll throw out a stat because it's not good. We've had Synergy, which is basically just basic grade and attendance information. And we do track that utilization because we want to make sure that we're getting the bang for the buck when we put in an implementation of a system. and less than 50% of parents access that system. So that is a concerning number. And I say that to say to the board that we are cognizant and focused on improving that number, because you want to make the data accessible and readily available. However, you want to make sure that parents are accessing that data. So one of the biggest benefits moving forward about CTLS Parent is being able to provide the parent with not just grade and attendance information, but here's, based on your child's data, some recommended resources to utilize with your child. Again, we're trying to encourage the level of engagement of parents with their students when they're at home and not at school. And a lot of times, because we've heard this, it's anecdotal, but it's very real, that parents want to be engaged and help with homework and assignments and projects and those kind of things. But let's just be real honest that the education today is vastly different than it has been in the past few years. So that being said, I think that, we've taken the lead on this as a district to say, okay, it's our responsibility to help those parents get engaged. So that's what CTLS Parent has at the root of it, is that deliberate effort to help parents get engaged with their students' academic career. Because, again, definitely we all know the helicopter parents, the tiger moms, these kind of things, and those are always going to be there. But we need to help the parents that just genuinely want to help their students. And that again, is the focus of CTLS Parents. So all of the comments thus far, let me just back up and say, again, we've got the best teachers anywhere, and they are doing what they can do to communicate. And I think that if any ball has been dropped, I'll take that drop, because we should have done a better job of identifying the appropriate communication resources and figuring out a way to not have schools, if there is a cost, have to incur that cost, because then you get into the haves and the have-nots. And that's not something we want to propagate either, because we need to be focused on, just like our vision statement says, excellence for all children, so where all students succeed. So that being said, I will definitely take that ball drop and say that we've got the ball, and we'll take it from here and move forward, and we'll keep the board definitely updated on the progress of that as well.
Thank you, Mr. Ragsdale. Mr. Banks, you had a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple of questions. Is Parent View, is that the same thing as your CTLS Parent? Is that the same thing, or is that something different?
No, Parent View is what I just referenced as Synergy, and I should have done a better job of clarifying that. Synergy is the company, and Parent View is the application.
Does it lend itself to what Mr. Morgan is looking at?
No.
Some kind of common communications?
No, it does not. It's simply for parents to access, that I was relating to earlier, referring to rather, parents being able to access grade and attendance information.
Okay, so it's not two ways, it's one way. Okay.
Correct.
And I would kind of piggyback off some of the things you said about education has changed. In my day and your day, teachers communicated through the phone. That was basically the only way you could do it. Now you've got many, many choices of ways to communicate. The problem I see from a district standpoint is, how do we manage that in order to maximize the capabilities and be as responsive to not only the students, but also to the parents, so that the parents know what the student's doing, the teacher knows what the student's doing, and all three of them are part of the overall objective. And you mentioned haves and have-nots. That's almost not existing anymore. Almost everybody has a cell phone or has access to a cell phone. So communications has changed, and I think, what Mr. Morgan has brought up is something that, we need to take a look at and see, how can we be more effective with students and parents as far as maintaining the education process. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Banks, let me clarify one of my statements because you just brought it to my attention that it wasn't very clear. When I mentioned the have and the have-nots, what I was referring to is actually schools. So our schools, as you all well know, some of our schools have a very, very productive foundation that allows that school to be able to purchase things that other schools that do not have that productive of a foundation or PTA are not in the position to be able to do that. So that's what I was referring to as actually schools. So my point is that when we are looking to standardize on anything, and regardless of how deep that standardization goes, we need to first look at, can we provide that resource, whatever that's going to be, from the district level. It should not be the standard of operation to say, elementary schools, you need to pick a blog, and by the way, however much it costs is up to you to pay for. That's just not a good way of doing business. So we need to at least. I'm not saying that we need to add a budget item to accomplish this. What I'm saying is we just need to make sure we do the appropriate analysis from a financial perspective. In that, okay, if this is the best blog and 99% of the elementary schools want to utilize this particular blog, is there a cost? If there is it capable of being funded at the district level? And that's, I'm not saying anything new as far as a concept, because that's basically what we're doing with CTLS. That's what we're doing, as you'll see in the literacy presentation where we've done Read 180 and System 44. These were applications that were normally purchased by the schools. So when I first came to the district a long time ago, in the elementary schools, there were something like 40 different reading applications. Okay, so consistency was zero. And so if you had, and we all know transiency exists in this district, and when teacher went from one school to another school, that also impacts the teachability, if you will, of a standard. So standardization to a degree, it should be the goal. And I say to a degree because one size doesn't fit all. But that being said, I just wanted to clarify that statement. That was a long way of doing that, but the haves and have-nots.
Well, let me add on some more to my statement, is that I want to commend the teachers for the aggressive stance they have taken in order to communicate not only with the students but with the parents. It's changed so much, and it's almost like real time. If you want to know something an hour from now, a teacher can tell you, the whole class and the parents exactly what's going on, what's happened, or if there's been an incident in the classroom. That teacher can communicate directly with that parent or with that student without hesitation. They don't have to wait a day or two in order to do that. So I do applaud the teachers' aggressiveness in communications, which really in the past was not there the way it is now. And of course, technology has changed all that. And I'll say again, our problem is how do we manage it? Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Morgan.
Thank you.
Mr. Banks.
Very good, rich, and robust conversation about communication, which has to be a part of, any effective communication has to be a part of the formula of student success. Another question that I have, well, actually, before I do that, let me preface by saying that I want to say Dr. McGee over at Lindley Sixth Grade Academy. Speaking of communication, I really appreciate, now this is just at Lindley Sixth Grade Academy. I mean, not just there. That's all I can speak of. The weekly call-outs that she does. It really helps me as a parent. just Sundays. Hey, like for example, they just had grandparents' night, and I really appreciate that. It's a call, come to your phone, jot your notes. I have a good game plan in terms of what's happening school-wide. I really appreciate her doing that. Other thing I want to say is that I think many of us can attest that if your child has a really good teacher, it's like a love affair. Like you don't ever want it to end. That teacher, you're like, oh my God, will you just continue to teach her or continue to teach him? And on the other side of the coin, if they have someone that's not that stellar, it can't end quickly enough. Question I have is this, and I think this is drilling down a little bit more. Most definitely want to highlight the successes. What type of standards or accountabilities are in place if a teacher rarely updates his or her blog? Just, you might get it Tuesday this week, they might miss 2 weeks, and then you might get another one. Or Parent View, in terms of putting the information in the system. From that vantage point, that can be very, quite frankly, that can be very frustrating. Just the sense of, oh my God, I don't know when the grades, don't know. I've actually had parents tell me, and then by the time I found out the grade, it was, my kid had an 87, then the next time teacher X put a grade in there, it was a 63. And just the amount of time, and I want to underscore that I know firsthand because I was in the position, I know that churning out grades and get them in the is it's not an easy task to consistently do that. But my question is, are there systems set up that say, okay, Tuesday, David, the blog, you will get this blog, or Thursday, I don't care what day it is, I just want some consistency in terms of the blogs and Parent View. Are there any things to ensure that happens and that it's not sporadic?
So let me start from the blog perspective, and the real short answer to that is no, because going back to our previous conversation, there is no standardization. So I would tend to say, and this is purely anecdotal, but I would tend to say that if a teacher has a blog, it's going to be pretty regularly updated because there's no requirement or standard or push from a school, from a district perspective to have that. So that's just an assumption. Now
they're choosing to do it.
Yeah, exactly. Now, once we get down the road of saying, okay, we're looking at more standardization, then certainly additional checks and balances will come into play. From the Parent View synergy perspective, there are checks and balances in place. Sherry's assistant soups, which supervise all the principals, which supervise all the teachers down to that level. So there are checks and balances in place. I'm not saying they're foolproof, right? So there can always be room for improvement, but that is something that from the assistant soup level perspective, they are pinging those principals to make sure that they're pinging their teachers that on a regular basis that those grades are input, because to your point, the reason that you want to have data accessible is to inform parents that are engaged and to be able to be engaged, to be able to affect change both at home and in the classroom. So that being said, it's certainly our expectation, it's certainly my expectation that grades are readily and frequently updated as appropriate, because that would absolutely defeat the purpose and could perhaps contribute to the less than 50% utilization rate. So there's two sides to that coin. So I will definitely say there is nothing in place for blogs, but once we get to the point of saying, okay, we're identifying to some degree standardization of blogs and communication, then those expectations will be clearly communicated and expectations and accountability linked together. Obviously, we can do better at the grade update and synergy if that's been your experience, which obviously it has, or you wouldn't be saying that.
Very good point. As I said, Another quick shout out for a teacher is at Lindley Sixth Grade Academy, they call all of the teachers professors, and the students are referred to as scholars. Professor Gooden, she's a math teacher, and I don't use this word lightly. She's transformational in terms of how she teaches. I mean, and so it's like that standard, and in my mind, putting people in position to be successful, in my mind, that should be the standard. Like, it shouldn't be this wild variation. Then my third teacher, I hadn't heard from him or her in 3 weeks. I don't know what's going on in there. That is it. One other quick thing. Now, Mr. Superintendent, when you say utilization, that's different from signing up, right?
Yes. Yes, that is logging in and accessing the system.
Okay, I got you. Okay. Mr. Chair, I yield. I appreciate the opportunity, and I look forward to, in future months or whatever it might be, seeing how this plays itself out.
Thank you, Mr. Morgan. Ms. Thayer, you have a comment?
Once again, I think it's great that we're having these discussions about communications and things. One of the things I learned as a principal, and I think you were a principal of a private school at some point, weren't you, David? But it was a public school. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
One day of prize. She think I had all these rich kids.
That's right. That's right. That's right. That's right. That's what I think. All right, cool it, Mr. Morgan. So anyway, my point was I learned real quickly that if I wanted to totally destroy the morale in the faculty, it was when 2 or 3 people were doing something wrong and I came in and blasted the whole faculty with it. You know, if most of our teachers are communicating well, that one you haven't heard for in 3 or 4 weeks, my suggestion would be call the principal, let the principal take care of that. It doesn't take a mandate across the system. I know that your goal is to improve communication everywhere, and I support that 100%. But I don't want us to see as a system that then we come down with these standards when most other people are doing a good job. I think that's something we just have to watch for. So that was all. Thank you. Sorry, Mr. Morgan, I did not mean to ruffle your feathers.
Man, she just want me to teach just like, oh, you had talk real slow.
Mr. Scammahorn, your turn.
Well, I want to ruffle your feathers. No, I'm not. So I wanted, again, to add to what Ms. Thayer is saying is blogs. Now, we've tried this before. Again, I don't know if it was when Ms. Thayer was with us, but when I was an administrator, we tried to mandate blogs, but different subjects have different requirements. Different schools have different requirements, and teachers. Blog is more, right now, I would say more of a technique or method that fits into a teacher's repertoire of lesson assignments, communications, the combination thereof, because some blogs might not need updated for 2, 3, 4 weeks. Others need to be updated daily, you know. So I think we need to be careful as to the standardizing and curtailing what teachers may want to do. And the other thing, too, is parents generally will tell their teachers how they want to be communicated with. You know, at the beginning of the school year, you know, I'm not home enough to check my computer. Would you text me if you have an issue for me or something like that? So even though it's a great discussion, we need to be careful not to constrain our teachers. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Scammahorn. All right, I guess we're ready to move to our superintendent's report. Literacy update.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chair, members of the board. I'm going to ask Jennifer Lawson to come forward and bring about the presentation on the literacy update. While literacy update is a very broad and really undefining title, you're going to hear some very familiar terms and see some data that some of it you have seen before, some of it you're seeing a new version. And an updated version of that data because, again, you have heard us say, you've heard me say, that we're not about fads. We're not about changing directions in the middle of the process. We're about consistency. So I think what you will see from this update is, number one, that consistency that we have said we're committed to is bringing about tremendous results. And what brings about tremendous results, you keep moving with. So with that, Jennifer, take it away.
Mr. Chair, members of the board, and Mr. Superintendent, I bring to you today a district literacy initiative update. Our district recognizes that developing robust literacy skills is at the very heart of empowering children to thrive in schools and in life. That is why, under the leadership of our board and our superintendent, our district has committed our time and resources to providing a portfolio of literacy and professional development resources that support the whole child in the classroom, in small groups, independently, at home, and in the community, extending in the Cobb County School District quite literally, as you will hear, from diapers to diploma. We have known for a long time that one of the best ways to support student success is to encourage them to read. Reading builds a cognitive processing infrastructure with each child that then significantly influences every aspect of their thinking, their depth and breadth of knowledge, vocabulary, ability to reason and think critically about words and numbers. Reading also educates the imagination, supports the spirit of creativity, and makes students more compassionate and confident as they grow and develop. Through a systematic and balanced approach to literacy instruction and support, we are transforming literacy and learning to increase student achievement. This approach recognizes that we must ensure our students, teachers, parents, and community have the knowledge, skills, and resources they need to help students become proficient, fluent readers. To that end, it is my privilege today to provide you an update on the intentional and focused work being led by our schools and the district related to literacy development. I would be remiss if I didn't take a minute to remind us that though this presentation may focus primarily on early literacy development, our commitment to literacy extends from birth through the 12th grade. While we acknowledge the critical role early brain and literacy development play in overall student success, we also recognize that literacy development is less about a critical period and more about windows of opportunity that extend across early childhood all the way through adolescence. We believe in a balanced approach to literacy instruction at all grade levels, whereby reading, speaking, listening, and writing are interconnected. Our balanced instructional approach focuses on building a solid literacy foundation from which to build. This approach is less about a program and more about the critical elements of robust literacy instruction, experiences, and support that lead to strong and proficient readers and increased student achievement. Under the leadership and direction of this board and our superintendent, the district has acquired resources in 16 and in 17 that supported a rigorous and balanced approach to literacy instruction at all grade levels. Through continued professional learning and the processes and practices discussed in this presentation, our district remains committed to ensuring all students every day receive rigorous literacy instruction that equips them with the knowledge and skills necessary for future academic success. Ironically, our district's commitment to rich literacy development begins long before our students join us on the first day of kindergarten. As we discussed at last month's board meeting, we are currently in a partnership with WellStar Health System, working through a proof of concept where pediatricians and educators very intentionally partner to encourage parents to support healthy brain development and school readiness through literacy during those critical birth to 5 years. Learning to read represents the weaving together of multiple skills, understanding, and orientations, many of which have their developmental beginnings during infancy and these critical childhood years. We know through research that these foundational reading and writing skills that develop from birth to 5 have a clear and consistently strong relationship with later conventional literacy skills for our students. Through our partnership with WellStar, parents are asked developmentally appropriate questions about their child's literacy development at each well visit. They receive a postcard similar to the sample that you have at your seat that is specific to each well-check age band. These postcards contain an example of a developmentally appropriate book, strategies that support early brain and literacy development at that specific stage of life, and links to additional resources we have provided. These cards also have a QR code that take them directly to a video of a parent modeling strategies for that age as well. For one pediatric office, we were able to secure a grant that provided a hard copy of each of these book titles for every child at each of their well visits between birth and 5 years old. Parents also completed a survey regarding how this information and these resources have impacted their interactions and routines with their child. These results are being used to inform the next phase of this work. The slide you see before you represents the scope of work that has been completed over the course of the last year. We have our next meeting scheduled with Dr. Avril Beckford, WellStar's Chief Pediatric Officer, and her team on the 20th of this month, and we'll evaluate the results of this proof of concept based on the pediatric office and parent feedback and determine next steps for growth and sustainability. Ultimately, our goal is to see every pediatric office in Cobb County join us in this partnership to intentionally and consistently provide parents with literacy resources and support from the very first well visit until the time they register their student for kindergarten. This window of opportunity and community partnership has the potential to provide benefits that last a lifetime, including academic success and the prevention of reading challenges later in a child's life. In addition to the partnership with WellStar, we also are leading work around early literacy in several other ways. We currently have 3 initiatives underway: our pre-K proof of concept, our early kindergarten, and our early literacy initiative. I'd like to take a minute to review the details and data associated with each one of these. Our Georgia pre-K class is now beginning its second year at Hendricks Elementary School. This is similar to the Georgia pre-K programs you might be more familiar with in our local child care centers. The program is partially funded through Georgia's Department of Early Care and Learning, or DCAL, and adheres to the CCSD school calendar with the same days and hours as our school-aged children. The children served by the program must be 4 on or before September 1st so that they qualify for kindergarten the very next year. We had 22 students enrolled in the class last year. We have 22 students enrolled this year and have a wait list with 18 students on it. One of our superintendent's priorities is to use data to inform decisions, and so we are constantly evaluating the impact of these programs on our students' academic success. To that end, the data you are looking at here represents the pre- and post-assessment results for our pre-K class during the 17-18 school year. As you can see, the blue line represents the percentage of students who demonstrated some level of mastery of that skill or standard at the beginning of the school year. The orange line indicates the percentage of students who demonstrated mastery of that same skill or standard at the end of the year. As you might expect, these students showed tremendous growth after 1 year in the pre-K program. For example, only 35% of these students were able to identify uppercase letters with 50% accuracy on the pretest, but 85 demonstrated mastery of that standard on the post-test at the end of the year. Only half of the students could identify their name on the pretest. 100% of those same students were able to do it on the post-test. You also notice that in the areas of concepts of print and rhyming words, at the time of the pretest, the percentage of students demonstrating any mastery was 0. And by the time of the post-test, more than half of the students were showing progress toward mastery in these standards. All of these skills will continue to be built upon until they enter into kindergarten and strive for 100% accuracy on all of the standards and those that will build upon these. While we celebrate these results and the incredible job done by our Hendricks staff, we will continue to monitor these students throughout kindergarten this year and compare their achievement to those who did not have a pre-K experience. Ultimately, the long-term goal of this investment continues to be that it translates into on or above grade level academic performance. We will certainly keep the board informed as the longitudinal data becomes available. Because the district recognized that the traditional pre-K model at Hendricks was inherently limited based upon space availability in our local schools, at the time we also explored other innovative models that would allow us to provide our students with a pre-kindergarten experience. As a result, we developed the Early K model at Belmont Hills in the summer of 2017 and were able to expand it to include Norton Park Elementary this past summer. This model, in essence, allows students to begin kindergarten 6 weeks early in a literacy-rich environment that provides them access to learning, experiences, and an environment that they may not have otherwise been exposed to prior to the traditional first day of school. As we did with the pre-K program, we also evaluated the impact of this program on the academic progress of our students. The data before you represents the progress of our first cohort of students who began early K and kindergarten in the summer of 2017. As you can see, there were 3 classes in kindergarten that year. Class 1 contained all of the early K students. They had the opportunity to be with the same teacher from June till the following May. There were 19 students in the early K class and 13 in each of the other 2 classes. Interestingly enough, though the class size was significantly bigger in the early K class, you can see that class size did not seem to be a significant factor in the student achievement. If anything, the larger class performed as well or better in some areas. The percentage of students who qualified for early intervention program was 9% lower than the other 2 classes. The number of students referred to special education was 0. And the average end-of-year fluency score on the foundational reading assessment was between 2 and 12 points higher than the non-early K students. One very important piece of data I want to draw your attention to is the percent of students reading on grade level at Belmont Hills at the end of kindergarten. 100% of our kindergarten students that year ended the year on or above grade level. This speaks to the outstanding job our teachers and leaders do, regardless of what their students' prior learning experience may or may not have been prior to the first day of school. It is also worth noting that the early K class had 1/3 of its students prepared to take the reading comprehension assessment, which indicates above grade level performance. I start with this cohort of students because we have had a year to monitor their progress over time. However, this past summer, we were able to expand the program to Norton Park as well. This next slide represents the past summer's cohort of Belmont Hills and Norton Park students. This slide shows the positive trend
Hold on,
between...
I got to interrupt. I can't stand it no more. Go back to that last slide. I tried to be quiet, but I can't stand it. So Jennifer hit this, but I'm going to hit it a little bit harder. What you're seeing here is the next to the last line about the FRA. That says that every kindergarten teacher at Belmont Hills did such an awesome job that 100% of their students, 100% are on grade level reading at the end of kindergarten. Folks, that's awesome. That's what it's all about. So are those students more or less likely to be on grade level reading by 3rd grade, which is obviously our district-wide goal? The answer is obvious. You didn't really have to answer, Mr. Morgan, but I do appreciate you answering that. Yeah, exactly. All right, so here's the big one, though, okay? And this, I know Jennifer hit it, but she's not going to hit it like I'm about to hit it. So the last point there about being prepared for the reading comprehension assessment, what you can see is that the early kindergarten class, over one class is over twice as ready. Okay, but significantly over the class number 3 also. Folks, that's not saying that they can walk in a straight line and play well with others, right, which is what maybe another early kindergarten program that's not ours might be focused on. The early kindergarten that we developed internally is focused on academics. And that's what is most important for these students coming into kindergarten that have not had, for whatever reason, the appropriate level of preparedness to enter kindergarten. Because again, you guys know it, but I'm preaching pretty much to the community now. There are kindergarten standards that are rigorous. This is not like it used to be. As we've all said, back in our day, kindergarten was optional when I went to kindergarten. It wasn't required. Today, yeah, exactly. Yeah, I resemble that remark. So my kindergarten teacher was Miss Ragsdale, too, by the way. Not my mom, but anyway. So the point, though, I'm making that is a real hard point that I'm making is that we focused on what the need was for our students coming to Cobb County schools in kindergarten, not necessarily at the level of preparedness that they needed to be. And what we're showing you today is that the results of that program that we created in-house definitely brought about the results that we expected, but that also maybe or maybe not, could prove it. So I know, we've had the question in past about, okay, when are we rolling this out? How many schools we're going to roll it out to next year, kind of thing. This is what we were waiting on to make sure that our theory was proven, and it definitely was. So I can't say enough about that, and comparing this to the regular pre-K program, which is an entire year long. What you're seeing here is there is no space limitation because this is 6 to 7 weeks before the start of school at their school. The other benefit to this is, depending on the number of students that do take advantage of the opportunity or the parents that take advantage of the opportunity, this kindergarten teacher that had the 19 students in the early kindergarten at Belmont Hills wanted to keep all of those students together and did so. That's another benefit, because that teacher was able to get another 7, weeks of instruction with those same kids, with the parents having that optional. So they definitely took advantage of it. So you can't get much more engaged than those parents were, Mr. Morgan. So that being said, though, I wanted to make that point really, really visible because, again, when you create something, it's just like being in business. If you're in charge of your own destiny, you're going to be focused on exactly what you want that outcome to be. If you're going to go to a store and buy something off the shelf that is dictated to you about how it's going to be, what it's going to be, then that's what you're going to be tied to. Obviously, the results of the early kindergarten at Belmont Hills have proven that this program was put together with the right outcomes in mind, but most importantly, again, we asked for teachers that wanted to do this. So having that combination of the teachers that wanted to get these kindergarten students before they received them day one of school and get that level of preparedness up to par, it's a team effort. So I can't say enough about, number one, all the kindergarten teachers in this example at Belmont Hills getting all of their students, every single one of them, on grade level reading by the end of kindergarten, but then obviously showing that the early kindergarten program that we have designed is absolutely paying dividends. Sorry, Jennifer. I'll try to remain quiet moving forward.
I've got a couple questions, Ms. Lawson. Mr. Banks?
Sorry again.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's just the superintendent has opened the door. I've got a couple of questions. Were all these 19 students, or 13 or 13, were they all 4-year-olds? They'd already reached the age of 4, that there were no 3-year-olds yet?
We're now talking about the
pre-
early K, which
Pre-K,
are students.
yeah, the
pre-K.
early kindergarten.
The early kindergarten are all ready to start on August 1st, but instead they started at the beginning of June. So most of them would have been 5, or they're going to turn 5 by September 1st.
Okay. So there could have been some 4-year-olds in there.
Just
With the
like in a regular
5-year-olds.
kindergarten class, we started school on August 1st, but they
Right.
don't have to turn 5 till September 1st. So you can have a few
Right,
babies.
which means, a June or July or August student
Yes, sir.
could be 4-year-olds at the time. They could have been in this class. Is that
Yes, sir.
correct? Okay. I need some clarification on this percentage that you were referring to. What is that really percentage of? What's that based on?
Which one are you referring to, Mr.
I'm
Banks?
talking about the percentage of student ready for reading comprehensive, the last bullet point.
Okay, so students in kindergarten and first grade take what we call the Foundational Reading Assessment, FRA.
At
And
what
it's typical.
time? At what time?
Usually, they can take it up until the end of second grade.
Okay.
But kindergarten and first is where we traditionally see them, and then they start to transition over into comprehension, and they take the comprehension portion of that assessment. So what that suggests to you is, in kindergarten and first, we would consider it very developmentally appropriate and on grade level to still be on the FRA, the Foundational Reading Assessment. But these students were doing so well that they were ready for us to move them into the next assessment. So that would suggest that they are performing above grade level. We typically expect first graders to reach a 49 on the FRA by the end of the year and start going into the comprehension. These kindergartners finished kindergarten last May, ready to take the comprehension portion of it, so they would be above grade level at that time.
So out of the 19, 32% were ready. Is that, am I reading
Yes,
it right?
sir. 100% were on grade level, but then 32% of them were performing so high that they're ready to go actually into the next assessment.
All right, okay, I understand now. Thank you.
I got one more for you. Mr. Scamhorn?
Real quick, you answered the half of my question with FRA, Foundational Reading Assessment. What's EIP, Early Intervention Program?
Yes, sir. Early Intervention Program.
Okay, I just had to guess, so.
Well, you did a great job.
And then EOI's end of year?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
As you can see, 28% of these students demonstrated some level of mastery on the pretest when they started the first week in June. 38% demonstrated that progress 3 weeks later, and at the conclusion of the program, approximately 6 weeks, 55% of the students demonstrated progress toward mastery. Though this information may be helpful, you can actually view the same data broken down by standard in our Cobb Teaching and Learning System, or CTLS. The top chart here represents how students performed by standard on the pretest, and the bottom represents the same on the post-test. You can see within each literacy standard there is positive growth. For example, in the first standard, recognize and name all upper and lowercase letters, the students were only able to answer 51% of those questions correctly, as opposed to the post-test 6 weeks later, where they were able to recognize 68% of those questions correctly. Recognizing and producing rhyming words went from 11% accuracy at the beginning of the summer to 45% accuracy prior to the first traditional day of kindergarten. As with Hendricks Pre-K, while the short-term gains are worthy of noting and celebrating, and we want to certainly acknowledge all of the effort and those amazing teachers and Dr. Campoli at Belmont Hills for her leadership, we ultimately want to look at how this experience impacts the long-term success of our students as we strive to ensure that every student is reading on or above grade level by third grade. Since this is the second year of the Early K model, we have been able to monitor the original class from Belmont Hills as they matriculate through first grade this year and monitor the academic success of the second cohort from both schools as they progress through kindergarten this year. As we continue to monitor the progress of both of these groups of students, we will absolutely evaluate the short-term and long-term impact of this program and determine next steps regarding sustainability and expansion. Another layer of our systematic and balanced approach to literacy instruction is one most of you are familiar with, the Early Literacy Initiative. To be clear, this approach is not about a program or a fancy new resource. Instead, it is about intentionally and systematically leveraging the resources we already have to affect positive student outcomes. As you may recall, the Early Literacy Initiative is based on a 10 to 15-day instructional cycle, depending on the grade level and the standards being taught. It's followed by a teacher and district-designed formative assessment. A day or so after that assessment, a data call is facilitated by principals and district leaders, where very focused, accelerated intervention and enrichment strategies are discussed and shared. From there, areas needing additional professional learning or support are identified and support is provided. This initiative focuses on providing consistent, high-quality instruction coupled with frequent progress monitoring and collaboration, leading to very targeted interventions when gaps and weaknesses in student learning are detected. While all of these components are considered best practices, And to be clear, they are certainly not limited to just this initiative, the incredible work that all of our schools lead. They employ some of these strategies. The difference here is the unique partnership between the local schools and the district and the fidelity of implementation. During these data calls, local school and district leaders are regularly discussing strategies and ideas. They are problem solving and sharing. They're discussing the successes and specific needs of students and student groups. This process allows each student to benefit from the collective expertise of all the professionals sitting on that data call. And from there, we are able to customize the support needed for a school, a teacher, or even an individual student. All of these efforts are focused on ensuring we deliver what our superintendent has charged us with, ensuring that all students are reading on or above grade level by third grade. Without any further delay, let me give you a little peek into how this process translates into differentiated and personalized instruction for an individual student. As I mentioned earlier in this presentation, a critical element of this initiative is to frequently and consistently monitor student progress so we can intervene quickly. As our teachers give these short formative assessments, they are able to immediately see how their class as a whole and individual students performed. The table on the left shows the overall assessment results of a single class by individual student. The table next to that shows the same class, but it breaks it down by the standard. And finally, the last report on the right is perhaps the most powerful, as it allows the teacher for that same class to drill down to an individual student by standard. This teacher knows immediately who he or she needs to pull tomorrow morning, this afternoon, in a small group to address learning deficits related to a specific standard or group of standards, thus allowing the data to immediately affect change in instruction that impacts student achievement. You can look on the assessment results by single class, by standard, and by student. The orange and the red at the bottom, if I'm teaching that class, I know immediately that those 6 students at the bottom need my intervention. So tomorrow morning, I may choose in small group to then jump back in and clarify some misunderstanding or provide some additional support. As we enter into our third year in the Early Learning Initiative, as with the pre-K and early K programs, we continue to monitor the impact and effectiveness of this work on the academic success of our students, as measured by the number of students on or above grade level. We know, based upon research, that one of the best indicators of students' future success is that they are reading on grade level by the conclusion of second grade, hence our superintendent's charge of having them on grade level by third. With that in mind, the data before you represents all 12 schools in the literacy cohort. The schools on the left represent those that partnered with us in 2016, beginning with kindergarten and rolling up to first grade last year. The schools on the right are cohort 2 schools that joined us in this work last year with their kindergarten and have rolled up to first grade this year. As we look at this data, please keep in mind the goal of this initiative is to increase the number of third graders reading on or above grade level. The crimson-colored bar represents the percentage of students at each school who demonstrated reading proficiency at the end of last year in the grades that were included in the literacy initiative work. For example, in the first cohort, that will include all students in grades K and 1. In the second cohort of schools, that will include only kindergarten since they just rolled up to first grade. The gray bar represents the percentage of current third grade students at each school that have demonstrated on or above grade level reading proficiency on the reading assessment this year. The window has just closed for our first assessment for the reading inventory. That's where those numbers have come from. This would be our baseline data moving forward. Obviously, our goal is to continue to provide higher numbers of students in grades K1 and 2 that demonstrate on-grade level proficiency so that we can steadily increase the number of students reading on-grade level by third as measured by the reading comprehension assessment. Let's take a quick look at a couple examples that might be helpful. Belmont Hills, 80% of their kindergarten and first grade students demonstrated proficiency in May last spring. 45% of their current third grade students are currently performing at a proficient reading level. If we maintain this trend after these students continue in the literacy initiative through second grade this year, we expect to increase the number of third graders reading on grade level to above the baseline of the current 45%. We do have a couple instances where the percentage of third graders reading on grade level is higher than the number of kindergarten students currently reading. For instance, in the data call as recently as this week, the principal at Powers Ferry has implemented a 30-minute intervention enrichment block into the master schedule to build targeted focused times when teachers and support staff, such as our early intervention program teachers, our English language learner teachers, and our special ed teachers, can push into classes and provide students very focused and differentiated instruction to help close those gaps based on what the data is telling us. What are some factors that contribute to students not demonstrating on-grade level proficiency? Transiency is one of those barriers to literacy for students. We took a look at the transiency rate within the first cohort last year. These are students that if they could have remained in the same school since kindergarten would have had 2 years of consistent literacy instruction and progress monitoring. Only 68% of those students are still enrolled in a cohort school. 32% have moved to at least one other school, some more than one. Fortunately, approximately 54 of those students who are no longer in their original school they began kindergarten with, they did move, but they enrolled in another literacy cohort school, thus minimizing lost instructional time due to transiency. Pacing would be consistent, and data would have been easily and quickly available to the new teachers for these students, allowing him or her to pick up where the last teacher just left off. Though transiency does play a significant role in the educational process, we are committed to reducing the impact of factors like these by providing consistent, high-quality literacy instruction and support for all our students and putting very intentional safeguards, like the literacy initiative, in place to help overcome those barriers to high levels of learning when and where needed. Having said that, I would like to take just a moment to highlight some notable achievements regardless of transiency or any other factors. First, in kindergarten, spring 2017, 8% of cohort 1 and 2 schools had students reading on a high enough level to take the reading comprehension assessment, which is not required until the 3rd grade. At the end of last year, spring 2018, we had 67% of those same schools with students with Lexile scores on the reading inventory. In 1st grade, after 2 years in the literacy initiative, the average Lexile entering 2nd grade is 29 points higher than compared to the previous year's students who had not been involved in the learning initiative, suggesting not only are more students demonstrating proficiency, but higher levels of proficiency are also being seen. As you recall, the long-term goal of this work is to provide students the high-quality instruction and accelerated interventions they need to be reading on grade level by the time they enter 3rd grade. We have a responsibility to not only close the gap for those not reading on grade level, but we have an equally important responsibility to grow those who are already on grade level. This approach accommodates both and prioritizes our time, talents, and resources both at the local school and the district where they need to be. Again, there's no easy answer or quick fix in this literacy work. Instead, it is the consistency instruction and pacing, frequent progress monitoring, collaboration, and immediate adjustment to instruction that has the power to affect positive student achievement and outcomes. What do we do, though, for students who might not be demonstrating on-grade level reading proficiency?
Okay, I can't help it anymore. Sorry. Go back one slide. I can't help it. Look, so here's what I want to focus on, though, right quick, just for one comment. The Belmont Hills at 25% and Green Acres at 24%. I'm going to go back to our mission statement, which is right there on that slide, one team, one goal, student success. Just like those are not just words that we came up with to put on a business card or whatever, that's what we live, is student success is our one goal. There are plenty of other school districts out there saying, oh yeah, we're going to focus on grade level reading by 3rd grade. Right. How many of them are showing results and are doing something to be able to show results from? That's why we've got as one of our priorities to make Cobb the best place to teach, lead, and learn because of things like this, where you have teachers that buy into what we're doing because it's not a fad, as I've already said, but you can see the results. Without great teachers doing the program of this early learning initiative, you're not going to get these results of 25% at Belmont Hills and 24% at Green Acres. And again, cohort 1, cohort 2, you can see there at spring 18, 67% had students with Lex Island RCA. That is huge. That is a results-based. Now stop trying to follow me up on everything, Mr. Banks. I'm trying to make a point here. And I know you're about to make something else. So, but seriously, the focus is not just on us doing something new. The focus is on us doing something to bring about the goal, to help us get to the goal of having students on grade level reading by 3rd grade. If we're not going to do something to work to attain the goal, why have the goal? So this is the purpose of this presentation, is to allow the board and the community and parents to see that when we set a goal, we actually work to try to attain and reach that goal. This is not something that we use so that we can say, you know, is on our priority list that, yep, we're going to have on grade level reading. But actually, we're working to get there. And again, I can't say enough that it's a team effort, but without the teachers being bought in to what we're trying to accomplish, you wouldn't see those numbers like that. So.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I thank you for opening the door, Mr. Ragsdale. There, you know, going from 8% to 67% is a big, big jump. I mean, that's astronomical. Can you tell us what happened? How did we go from 8% to 67%?
I really do attribute it to the that teachers worked with us. That's the other part to Mr. Ragsdale's point about the teacher buy-in. This was not a program, this was not a mandate from the district. Teachers continually provide us feedback on the assessments. This didn't work so well. We think this was not a good depiction of student knowledge, and we adjust that. So the teacher buy-in, there's ongoing professional development. So we have training in the summer for the teachers. We just had a training a couple weeks ago with ongoing literacy. We pay, the district provides their substitutes, so there's no expense to the school for that purpose. But honestly, what it comes down to is providing rigorous, consistent, high-quality instruction consistently and progress monitoring. When we have those data calls every 2.5 weeks, you immediately know what 6 kids didn't master something. You can go back in tomorrow morning and pull a small group and address that deficit rather than a month goes by or 6 weeks go by and you know they're behind, but you can't pinpoint what the standard is where I could be hitting a standard and closing the gap. So I think it's just the intentionality and the teachers and their dedication. It's also the principal and the academic coach and their support staff in their schools. This has become a primary focus of maintaining a focus on literacy achievement.
I think what you just said and what the superintendent just said is we have some extremely dedicated teachers who are focused on the students, and they do want them to be successful, which is part of our motto. So thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Banks. Mr. Scammore, you had a comment?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to make sure I'm clear. The down the bottom of page 5, that is the process, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
That sort of depicts whether it's kindergarten first or it will be the second this year. That's the process we cycle through repeatedly.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
But what do we do for students who might not be demonstrating on-grade level reading proficiency across grade levels? Depending on where a student is in relation to proficiency, they may be accessing one of these district-supported resources to help close those achievement gaps. Be clear, these are certainly not all of the supports or resources accessible, but instead are just a sample that is pertinent to today's discussion. One such intervention tool is a resource known as HeadSprout. It's an online instructional resource that adapts to the specific literacy needs of a student. For example, you may have a student who is showing a specific deficit in letter sound recognition or fluency. This resource can be used to provide very targeted support in one of those areas in a format that supports the ongoing classroom instruction. This can occur at school, but it also has a home component to support parent engagement. System 44 and Read 180 resources are made available to every single school in the district as well, freeing up local school funds to be used for other resources and interventions as they deem appropriate. System 44 focuses on the foundational reading skills that may be lacking for students in 3 through 12, and Read 180 supports those struggling more with comprehension, vocabulary, and writing in grades 4 through 12. The slide before you now represents our Head Sprout usage over the course of last year in our Cohort 1 and 2 schools. As a point of reference, for optimal growth, it is recommended that for students using this resource for a targeted intervention, it be used at least 3 times a week for a total of 60 minutes. You can see between our 12 cohort schools, they logged more than 35 million minutes and read more than 40,000 online books. Ironically, we have observed that our schools with the highest usage are also demonstrating the greatest gains. We have also expanded access as a consequence of this data we have expanded access to this to all K through 2 EIP classrooms in the district, not just our cohort schools. As part of supporting literacy at home, again, this resource is also accessible to students at school and from home so that parents are able to better support their child's literacy development. Finally, we monitor our System 44 and Read 180 data as well to ensure that we are seeing the student growth necessary to close achievement gaps and increase student achievement. The blue bar represents the number of students at the various levels of reading proficiency at the beginning of the year. The orange bars represent the number of students at each level at the end of the year. We see the number of students decreasing in the lower levels of proficiency by the end of the year. Depending on the age, grade level, and specific needs of a student, they may advance through the proficiency levels at a slower or faster rate, and thus determining how long they need the intervention to close the achievement gap and then be on track with their grade-appropriate peers. Before concluding, I do want to take a moment to recognize the remarkable leadership behind the work represented here. I have the privilege of sharing the work with you this afternoon, but it is truly the teachers, the paraprofessionals, the principals, and the district leaders that do this work and make it actionable for our students day in and day out. Let's be clear, they are making the critical difference. While there are too many to name, I do want to recognize those that are with us today from the district office that play a critical role in continually leading and supporting this literacy work. While most of our amazing staff that play such a critical role are out supporting students, as you might expect, I do want to recognize those that are with us here today. Ms. Kelly Metcalf, the Assistant Superintendent of Teaching and Learning, and Dr. Felicia Angel, the Director of Instruction and Innovative Practice. I also want to recognize Mrs. Sherry Hill and her 3 elementary assistant superintendents, Robin Latazori, Dr. Jamie Frost, and Elizabeth Mavity, as those assistant superintendents lead these data calls, walk the schools, have conversations with principals, and keep this work moving on. That is all I have, Mr. Superintendent. I turn it over to you for discussion.
Thanks, Ms. Lawson. Thank you all the ladies that are working on that. Any, Mr. Chastain?
He had his hand up first.
Mr. Scamhorn. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chastain. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Real quick, one thing that I like to see is training of our personnel, our people. Oftentimes veteran teachers, have learned different techniques from, when they went to school, whatever. What are we doing to make sure that our teachers aren't struggling with our processes? Well, not only the veterans, but the new one coming out of school. They're not getting CTLS and things that we're doing. What are we doing to ensure that our teachers are up to speed, ready to go?
That's a great question, Mr. Scamahorn. Thank you. One of the things we do when we onboard new teachers to the Cobb County School District is in July we have a new teacher academy. Part of that time is spent in the very things that you're talking about, a balanced approach to instruction. We actually do have a session that they attend based on CTLS. So we provide them with as much update information that they're going to need. The experience for New Teacher Academy is also built so there's a period of time before school starts and before pre-planning that they also go back to their local schools, and those principals then build in capacity from there as they meet with them in the afternoon. For example, one day they leave us for the district training, and they spend the back half of the afternoon really talking about what is specific to CTLS and reading, whether it's writer's workshop, what they need based on their principal in a very small, intimate group. That's how that's one of the processes. That's ongoing for our new teachers. Throughout the year, they have opportunities to receive additional training. When, is it November 6th or 7th, whichever our PL day is, they again will be in professional learning, and again on the January professional learning day. Those are all-day professional learning days as well. But then our academic coaches, our ELA supervisors, math, all of our content specialists under the direction of Dr. Angel are available to schools, so principals are constantly reaching out, knowing what their staff needs, and then we help to support them in providing that.
So they get these only on our teacher work days, or
No, sir. Those are things that we support as a district. Remember, the calendar also has early release days, and so principals have local school plans as well, where they're providing ongoing PL. Those are the things that we as a district specifically lead that I can say all teachers have access to.
Okay.
Then local schools create their own professional learning plans within that are very tailored to their specific needs.
Okay, thank you. One other question is, and if you said it, I missed it, so I apologize. So we're doing this at 6 schools, right?
The literacy work is at 12,
Yeah.
and we actually have an additional 6. We had a group of principals who had reached out about that work. The way we selected those original 6 and then 6 more is we looked at a compilation of data. We looked at Iowa reading scores. We looked at end of grade scores. We looked at their reading inventory, and we looked for trends to determine where did there seem to be a trend that maybe they would need additional support. Coupling that with principals who had reached out to say, hey, I'm really ready to lead this with you. And so they've really helped to make it their own. But we had additional principals over the course of last year who said, we really want in. But we've also got to figure out how to let them access the resources. So we have a new cohort. There are 6 principals who we're calling the principal-led cohort. We have provided them the same resources. We will provide them the same PL or different PL, but they want to lead it within their buildings. The data doesn't necessarily suggest that it's a priority as far as us spending district time like we do with the data calls every 2.5 weeks. But if principals see what is coming from this and they want access to it, we feel very strongly we shouldn't say to a school, yeah, no, we're sorry, but you're not part of the cohort. So we're working with them this year to try to design what does that cohort look like for principals who really want to lead this work themselves without being in the district cohort.
What is our plan for system-wide then? Because I can think throughout the county that we all need this. So
well, and you're correct. And what I referenced in my presentation was the practices and processes we talked about here are not by any means only going on with these 12 cohort schools. These are best practices for student achievement. So many of our principals are leading things like this on their own. They're looking at their data. So as schools have reached out, but some schools are getting tremendous results because they serve a different student who may have a different need. And so the consistency, as this is so structured, may not be necessary at every school. So we want to be very cautious that because it works in one place, we don't automatically assume that we need to lay it across everyone. It is a very targeted approach and make sure that our district resources remain focused in the areas that they should be given priority, and then we support everyone else from there.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Ms. Lawson.
Thank you, Mr. Skimhorn. Mr. Chastain?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Personal story observation question. The personal story is that I was in the 4th grade, I believe, when I read Sherlock Holmes's Hound of the Baskervilles. And I was fascinated by 221B Baker Street. I even read a letter to 221B Baker Street because they used to teach us to write letters in the 4th grade. and got a response. Apparently, that address had a museum in it dedicated to Sherlock Holmes. And we have a mystery here with, and all this is good. I am tickled with all this, but for my little piece, looking at the Early Literacy Initiative, one of the mysteries we have in reading, that was Early Literacy Initiative, page 7. But just looking at the fact that spring 2018, 67% of the cohort 1 and 2 had students with Lexile on the RCA. Subtract that from 100, that tells me there's 23%. We have the mystery of where do we find the folks that need the special help? And with the multiple reading disabilities that are out there, but one of which gets a lot of attention is being dyslexia, which we're told roughly 15% of the population's experiences or lives with dyslexia, that in any given population throughout the world, it's roughly 20%. It looks to me like part of the mystery of how do we help identify these kids that need help appears in our numbers here. So I think this is a step, and I also saw that in other slides you talked about what it looks like Fun with Phonics is coming back and the things we used to teach back in the 20th century that helped the folks with reading disabilities. So I applaud that. Now, here's my observation, or my question, because we're driven by data. Suppose you have a voluntary datum, and I don't know how this would happen. I'm just throwing this out here because of the subject. Dyslexia and some reading disabilities are hereditary. If I go to the doctor and fill out my forms while I'm waiting to be seen, you know, who in your family experienced diabetes, heart disease, blood pressure, rheumatoid arthritis, et cetera, et cetera. Suppose there was an opportunity for parents to volunteer information of hereditary nature that indicated that their child, because of past histories, either the parent or the spouse or whoever, might have had a reading disability. And that datum, if we could, I don't know if we can record it. I realize there's privacy things and all that. But all of a sudden, we would be able to identify the students that are going to need some of the targeted support. I don't know how he would do it. I know it's on the periphery of what we're talking about today. But having seen the number and thought about that, so is that something that would be possible? And I'll stop.
Well, let me attempt to address some of what you've addressed. Dyslexia, for example, falls under a specific learning disability in Georgia. But the research will say that most students, most individuals with dyslexia didn't necessarily need special education. They may need very high quality, explicit, consistent, multisensory approach to instruction. But we never want to assume that a student has a disability until we've gone through and provided them all the support and interventions that they personally need, until we recognize that there's something there, and that would then make them qualify for special education. So effective instruction that is evidence-based, it is structured, it's consistent, it's direct, and it's explicit are the pieces, for example, that dyslexic students need. But they're also the same characteristics of a high quality literacy experience. And so we want all of our students to have that. So to your point, we start to weed out students that may have some type of dyslexia, as you referenced, but they're performing on grade level. The structure and support and consistency with that multisensory approach allows them to not have to receive a label like special education because we've met them where they are. So to your point, that's why all of our support and specialized service personnel at the district office, for example, are Orton Gillingham trained. And so they use those multisensory approach strategies when we're going through this initiative. That's some of the conversation. Dr. Doe, our assistant superintendent over that area, is actually on these data calls so that as we start to look at kids, and the CTLS will even tell us if they have a disability. Dr. Doe, I can tell you, having been there to see it myself over the last couple of years, will pull their IEP, will read their IEP and see what the real deficit is and make sure that our special ed folks on the call are getting out to the SSAs who support those special ed teachers. So I think if that sort of answers your question, there's a very intentional purpose to make sure we are doing what is best practice. But again, as students have consistent, high-quality, research-based practice, then we're able to later determine as they would move through the response to intervention process and determine if they would need an additional support, which of course there are additional interventions and programs that we do provide.
Okay, so the answer to my question is we would not record that datum.
I would have to be honest and say one of the things, as the mother of 3 Cobb County students, I'm not sure that I would want someone to be predisposed until we go through the data and make sure that we're giving effective instruction. As soon as I'm having high quality effective instruction and we start to see a backdrop, I as a parent would be inclined to absolutely have that conversation with the teacher or the administration. But I would also be very cautious in us predisposing where we think there are issues, and that old self-fulfilling prophecy, all of a sudden we're expecting things from students that maybe that student doesn't have any issue at all. So I see where you're coming from. I think you're on the right line. I think there are some inherent risks we would have to really think through.
Let me, you brought up an interesting point that that we kind of covered, but not specifically. If you remember back on the slide that talked about Head Sprout and Read 180 and System 44, Jennifer just mentioned Orton Gillingham, and that's gotten a lot, for whatever reason, it's got a lot of attention lately, publicly in the press kind of stuff. What I want to draw your attention to is the fact that that is simply one tool. Just like Head Sprout and System 44 and Read 180 are each individual tools. So putting your all of your eggs in one basket, so to speak, is not necessarily the best approach, because one size certainly does not fit all. So I think it also goes to show the innovative and creative thinking that goes into multiple solutions to get to the end goal of on grade level reading. So it's not to say we're for or against any particular tool. I think what we need to be kind of preaching, if you will, is that we have an entire toolbox full of tools, and the teachers have access to those tools to make sure that they can use the most appropriate tool for their particular class or for particular students in their class. So again, I think that for the parents and the community at large, I think it's important for them to understand that, again, one size does not fit all. And so we provide and we focus on providing, number one, the most appropriate tool, but number two, a wide variety of tools such that teachers can utilize those tools in the best means necessary.
Mr. Sweeney?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Awesome job. You do a great job kind of discerning this, complex information into understandable terms. If we could, can we go back to the Belmont Hills slide for just a second? I want to make sure that I've got something clear here. It's page 4 on the handout that we have. Yeah, that's the slide. So if I'm looking at that, I just make sure. So the left-hand class number 1, those are the students that took advantage of the early kindergarten, this particular program. The columns 2 and 3, they did not take advantage of this program. That's right. Yet they all got to 100%, but the one that did the best was the cohort that basically went through the early K program. Yeah. All right. I mean, that's really the gist of this whole thing. I mean, that's phenomenal to kind of see that progress. And I guess, the next step in the evolution of this is determining, how that can be rolled out at the schools and determining what the costs associated with the programs would be. And I would certainly like to see that information. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sweeney. Ms. Thayer?
Thanks, Ms. Lawson. I wanted to thank you, your staff, the teachers, the principals, everyone who's been involved in this effort, because we all know early learning is the key thing for us to be concentrating on. We've spent so much time trying to fix problems later once they're ingrained and too hard, or students have lost interest in school, and to try to start at this is obviously the key. So thank you for everything you're doing, for making this available to us, and I just can't tell you how impressed I am with what we're doing and the fact that this is truly the thing that's going to make a difference in our school system. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Thayer. Point of order. Ms. Lawson, we look at these numbers, these transit rates, and they're pretty high. if a kid moves from one of these schools and they're considered transient, then do we know where they're going? Do they go to, let's say, another school in the system that's not in here, or one that is, or do they go to Paulding County or City of Atlanta or wherever they go? Do we know where these people are going?
Yes, sir. Actually, through a partnership with Dr. Catula and Mr. Fuesta's office, actually, in accountability, they've looked at the data for us because we were also curious to see that there were 54 children who were in a cohort 1 school who ended up leaving, so that would be transient, but they actually ended up going to another literacy cohort school. So I attribute some of that to then being part of the success that you're seeing, because students are then receiving consistent. So if I go from Belmont and I go to Norton Park tomorrow, the pacing that they're on is the same. The CTLS data goes immediately with them. Parent goes to enroll, staff, school personnel registers them into a course, they get a schedule, it talks to CTLS, and that new teacher can reference all the data that you just saw about that specific student and be able to pick up and go. So while I wish all of the students who are transient would remain within that cluster of cohort schools, because I think that could be a powerful factor at limiting the impact of transiency, we are looking at the number because we also strategically selected some of those schools knowing that they do exchange students. So how, when we can't prevent them from moving, how do we limit the impact of the transiency? And then there's a large portion that leave us altogether. But I will say, even for those who leave and don't go to another cohort school, the CTLS data is immediately. So if I leave and go off to TRIT and I'm now the TRIT teacher, I can see that student's CTLS data, so I know what they've been working on and I know how they've performed.
Now, to your question, it's a great question because transiency is a huge issue for every school in the state in the country. But to Jennifer's point and to the presentation, that's why so much focus was applied to standardizing the tools we have, such that System 44 and Read 180 are now provided by the district. So we're not requiring the schools to purchase them, which is a huge burden off of their plate. But the main priority was, if a student goes from one elementary school to the other, they're going to have the same tools in place such that the data that the teachers have access to is consistent. You're not comparing apples to oranges. Equally as important is when an elementary teacher goes from one of our schools to another one of our schools, obviously that tool set is the same as it was at his or her previous school. So there's a lot of benefit and a lot of dividends being paid by the consistency that we have and have put in place, and will continue to do so.
I think that's a good thing. I know when I was at McEachern back in the day, we used to have a lot of transient, and a lot of these kids would go from one school to another, but you couldn't get their schedules because they were on different blocks or different things, and they would lose, when you went to a different school, you'd lose that consistency. So I like this system approach. I think it's beneficial to a lot of the kids. Thank you. Anybody else?
Never looks this way.
Mr. Scanmore, are you still over there?
Yeah, I'm awake. Thank you.
You have 3 minutes.
I'm going to put a flashing red arrow up there. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hopefully just a couple of quick things. On page, before you go, page 3 and page 6 on those charts. I know they're showing a little bit different data, but here's my question. What happens to the students that aren't part of those success percentages? Do they get more teaching, more access, more one-on-one? And at the end of the year, if they're not, do we move them on? And the next teacher, I assume, has that previous year's data. How's that work? Because if every student's success, we just don't want to, pick a bar chart, identify a lower case with 50% accuracy. That's only about 82%, 81%, end of year.
Well,
So
and keep
where's
in
the other
mind,
eight?
that chart is that's DECAL's pre-K program that you're looking at.
Yeah.
So look, that doesn't really indicate that they're not above or below grade level. Our early K, but to answer your question, our early K, which would be our program where we set the standards and really communicate the expectations, absolutely we have students that either haven't been with us consistently, they've moved around, they came from another school. So those are the interventions that we talked about earlier, that we have very prescribed resources and opportunities for those kids. I referenced in the presentation, one particular elementary school saw a drop, and so they have scheduled a 30-minute intervention or enrichment block so that all of their support staff and those homeroom teachers can pull those kids and really meet them where they are, versus sometimes when you don't have that, I'm teaching, and if you pull me out, or if you pull a student out of my classroom to give them the help, they inherently have missed what's also going on in the classroom. So some of those type of intervention blocks are ways that we are creating opportunities within the scheduled time of the school day. We're really looking for how to leverage what we have. We can't always rely on parents or students to come after school or before school, those are also opportunities, but we really are trying to maximize every minute. And our resources like System 44, Read 180, Head Sprouts, but also our summer learning opportunities. Many of our schools identify students that are just below on grade level and will come during the summer and provide them some additional opportunities to shore up those gaps so that they have the best opportunity to begin the year on grade level.
Do I need a teacher recommendation for the summer program?
I will get you one, Mr. Scanlon.
Pardon?
You need a recommendation?
Oh, sure, I do. Yeah. But as a parent, or as a student, we send a note home saying we recommend and there's a space available for your student?
Different schools do it differently. A lot of them are Title I schools, use their Title I money to create enrichment programs. We really try to steer away from the old summer school. Kids don't want to come to summer school, so they've really created learning opportunities that they're learning. They're just having fun doing it. So sometimes it's a matter of, as a principal, I would sometimes offer to my student, I would handpick those who really needed to be there, but I would build in space for parents who also had students they wanted to come. And sometimes it's invitation only, depending on what the focus of that learning opportunity is, to be honest.
Okay, good. And on page 6, that chart that I referred to, most of those bars are hovering around 50 to 60%. And I do recall, and correct me if I'm wrong, I know you will, this was our baseline, correct?
The gray?
So we are expecting these all of these bars to move upward, correct?
Yes, sir. We chose the third grade reading because that's the district goal, and so we pulled this year's third graders in those schools and took their first third grade reading inventory score. And so the indication is if you've got a higher percentage of students remaining on or above grade level in kindergarten first and now rolling into second for that sixth cohort, then that stands to reason that we will then, at the end of this year, have second graders who have been in this program through kindergarten, first, and second. The percentage of students scoring at or above on the exact same third grade reading inventory this time next year should be higher, and that's how we will continue to measure where we need adjustments and whether or not the return on investment suggests that we need to expand and sustain.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Mr. Morgan, you have a question?
Yes. Hey, y'all, it's about to be long. No, first I want to say, I think it's been said that, the level of intentionality and commitment to executing this, it's to be applauded. It's unparalleled. It's unparalleled, this level of, because you know what, the easy way out is to just, throw something out there and just say, hey, we did something and hope nobody pays attention. But one of the things I want to say first before I ask a couple of questions is, to me, this dispels, well, in my mind, it asserts and it proves that if you put children in a position to be successful, then they're going to be successful. So whether you're born in South Georgia, North Georgia, urban, it doesn't matter. If you customize a learning environment for children, especially if you catch them early on, most of them going to thrive. So when I hear, people, oh, well, he didn't learn because he lived in Bainbridge, Georgia. He was poor. I think it's incumbent upon us, and what we're doing is customizing a learning environment that, regardless to where you are on the spectrum, we've customized it so you can come in and thrive. And I think this early literacy is a huge testament to that. I wanted to make that comment. Brad Johnson, Brad, you hear me? See, I know, caught you. I caught you, bro. I knew I was going to catch you. Listen to this.
Hanging on my every word, Brad?
I'm thinking that if I am in the cohort of 12 and I'm teaching, 12.
We just have 1 and 2.
But I'm just saying, right. But look, I'm talking about all these. See, you about to make me use profanity up here. See, if I am a teacher, and it's going to tie you in, Brad, I am really going above and beyond. Correct? This is intense stuff. This is intense stuff, right? This is no, right? You already know I'm going, right? Yeah. This is intense stuff. If I'm Belmont, Farrells, Green Acres, Norton Park, Riverside, Smyrna, Austell, Burnet, Compton, Mableton, Milford, Powell's Ferry. If I'm a part of this cohort with the level of attention and I am trying to, I still cannot, and the reason I keep beating this drum, if I am doing that much, and not only am I doing that much, and the outputs are clearly showing that, I forget which number it was, but it was 67%. How is it that we cannot configure a way for these great people to get some extra money? That's my question.
And let me answer that question there, Mr. Morgan. The only way we can do that is to find some extra, it is restating what you said, find some extra money for these teachers that's doing an awesome job. Only way we can do that is if somebody gives us some extra money.
Okay. Y'all clearly tell I'm not convinced.
Moving right along.
Teachers, I'll be trying. I hope y'all see I'll be up here trying. All right. Also, in terms of the assessments that we give, the district design assessments, the configuration, how do we come together and give that configuration? And the other thing I want to ask is the configuration of the assessments, are they done with any semblance of, well, you're going to be taking the milestones as well, so we want to make some level of symmetry between what our assessment is and what you might see on the milestones. That's the question I have about the assessments in terms of how we end up with the numbers that we end up with.
Two-part question. The first one being, Mrs. Lori Horn is our Director of Assessment Personalized Learning, and her assessment supervisors work very closely with the teachers to look at what is in that 10 to 15-day instructional cycle and what are the critical pieces that need to be assessed. We don't want to assess kids just for assessing, and we certainly don't want them to be sitting there taking an assessment that takes away an abundance of instructional time. So the purpose is to make them short and to make them very succinct so that teachers gather enough quick information every couple weeks to adjust instruction until they're ready to assess real mastery on like the touchstones, which come through the CTLS as well. So I will say that, remember, kindergarten looks very developmentally appropriate for kindergarten. If you look at it, it's almost like a flip book. I have administered the assessment to a student to get a feel. You sit one-on-one, the paraprofessional in a kindergarten class, who is critically important to that class. There really are two teachers in that room, can assess, or the teacher, or some of our principals have gone in, they assess, or they send additional staff members. As we get to first and second, those assessments start to look more and more like what they would see potentially on an end of grade, keeping in mind that we don't want to test children to death. We want to make the assessments short and sweet enough that it works for the student and it works for the teacher. That's one of the critical components of this program, is the constant feedback loop of this question's not working, or the assessment's too long, or we didn't ask the right thing, or the teachers would like us to look at asking again, and we go back and revise that. So yes, there's some intentionality, hopefully, that the formats, the information does support what they would see on the EOC eventually. Or
Also,
EOG.
keep in mind that, all of the research points to the reason that you have the goal of on-grade level reading by third grade is, again, learning to read versus reading to learn. So if we get to the point, let me phrase that, when we get to the point of having all third graders on grade level reading, all of the other subjects are going to improve and increase in the students' number one, comprehension, number two, academic performance, because that's just the way this works. So to Jennifer's point, we certainly are not creating, and to your question, creating assessments that are teaching to the milestones. I'm going to go back to my original analogy talking about autopsies versus biopsies. Okay, right now, the milestones are an autopsy. It's at the end of the year, the results are back to absolutely affect zero for that student. Instead, the touchstones and the pre-test, post-test that you saw in everything that we're doing through CTLS, those are more like biopsies, where you're saying, okay, what's wrong? What can we do? What kind of treatment do we need to put in place here to improve along the way? I don't know if I don't think you intended this, but the fact that we applied to the state for the waiver of milestones, this is exactly what we're talking about. We're in a position that we're doing things in this district that no other district in the country is doing. Matter of fact, we've been pinged by very large districts from across the continental U.S. to come see what we're doing. Much larger than we are, by the way. But the reason is because when you get into what we're doing through like this early learning initiative, and you're going every 10 days, okay, granted, literacy is the most important thing in early learning, bar none, because it impacts every other form of learning. All right, so once we get to all the students on grade level reading by third grade, then think about how we can apply this then to the focus on mathematics, English language arts, social studies. When you start applying these innovative, creative processes to all of the other subjects, then look at what not the district is going to be perceived as. Look at what the teachers are going to be able to accomplish with the students academically, which is then going to make the district be like, holy cow, how is this happening at Cobb County School District? What are y'all doing? What's in the water kind of stuff. So ultimately, and that's the big picture scenario, that's long term. That's where we're looking to be. We don't expect to be anywhere else but there. So great question. And we have a lot of parents choosing to opt out, of the milestones and the assessments and those kind of things that are dealing with nothing but checking a box for the state or some various other reason. So getting to the point of, again, you have to have good assessment.
Yes.
Okay, you have to be able to assess students to determine where they are, where they need to be, and how do you get them there. That's just the fact of the matter. It's the way teaching and learning works. So, but again, giving an assessment, having students sit through multiple hours-long assessments at the end of the school year accomplishes absolutely nothing, and that's not what we're about. We're about doing good assessing to get students to where they need to be. So I appreciate that question.
One other quick, two. I'm looking on page 5. One of the standards is writing. What does a student have to, what is considered proficient? I'm looking on page 5 with the Belmont Hills and Norton Park, the data. And And hey, we made a significant growth. We went from 68% to 91%. But what is considered writing? Like, is it, I can write my name, I can write a sentence, paragraph, what?
It can be any of that. It's letter formation, it's recognizing letters, it's being able to take thoughts and understanding that there's a correspondence between letters, sounds, and thoughts to tell a story. So depending on where you are, whether it's kindergarten all the way up through the 12th grade, it is a very long continuum of what is appropriate. So writing for kindergarten would be the ability to write their name. It would be able to write a word and then a sentence. And so that is what it would look like depending at the first day of school as opposed to the last day of school. Some of them have never held a pencil. Some of them have never seen pieces of paper with lines on them and understanding what hangs below the line, what goes up top. It could even be lowercase and uppercase letters and knowing the difference and how to compose those into a thought.
One other personal story about the touchstones is that, like, my daughter, who's a sixth grader, had a touchstone, sixth grade math. And what I liked about it was that it was rigorous. And I really liked how it was rigorous in the sense of that she had to do critical thinking. Like, it's one thing just to know 6 times 9. It's another thing to know that they're asking you to multiply, reading the question and knowing I need to divide in this particular problem. I need to multiply in this one, and I need to, all that to say that. So I know that the touchstones are a grade appropriate and that they're rigorous. Locally developed. That, so I know for a fact that that they are quality assessments, and that, because one of the worst things you want is a false sense of achievement or aptitude. Kids think you're up here, and then in reality you're not there. So I really applaud. You said Ms. Horn?
Ms. Lori Horn is our Director of Assessment and Personalized Learning.
The one that I saw.
But the teachers equally deserve, because she pulls them back together each summer. So it's not only Mrs. Horn's group is facilitating the meeting, but it's our teacher groups from all over the county. Yeah. One of our goals in that was that the standard is the standard is the standard, and it shouldn't matter where you live in the county. So you bring in a diverse group of teachers who really do decide, what does this standard say, regardless of where you live or what you're prepared for. This is the grade level standard. So the teachers really deserve a lot of the credit for doing that, and they come back together every summer and revise and look at places where we can make them stronger.
That's powerful, because when I was a student, I used to get, in math, I used to get intimidated by word problems. So I saw a word, I was like, oh man, I don't know what. But my daughter does it so much that she does it the same way she would do just, 5 times 10 or whatever the case. So great job. Appreciate that, Ms. Superintendent. I wish they did articles on this. Like, I wish this could be a headline and be on the news. I know it won't, but this is remarkable stuff. Kudos all around.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Morgan. Mr. Scamahorn, you have a final comment?
Just a quick follow-up. I wanted to kind of piggyback off of Mr. Morgan's request for more money for these 12, but I wanted to emphasize, even, and that's commendable, by the way, I wish we could, but I'd like to expand on that. Didn't you say there were other schools doing this? They're just not part of the designated cohorts, correct?
Yes, sir. We have 6 principals that were interested in seeing what these other schools were, so we've made these resources that we use available to them as well at no cost to them, and then are going to partner with them this year to see what that looks like in their particular school so that they can leverage these best practices, but making sure that that also doesn't distract from our attention that with these 12, there was quantitative data why we were focused there, but we're looking at this as an opportunity that anytime you've got incredible leaders who want to partner and want resources and to do things, we need to find a way to make that happen.
Okay. And then ask you and or the superintendent, unrelated to this, but yet related in the sense of our overall district. We have proof of concept things to improve things at every level, don't we? Going on, high school, middle school.
Depending on what initiatives we have, I'll let Mr. Rosedale speak to specifics, but yes.
Yeah, I mean, definitely we have proof of concept, and I appreciate the question, because I wanted to make the final remark on, we want to pay all of our teachers as much as we can pay them. I mean, every day, because they're the ones that's out there doing the work. They're the superstars, and we've got teachers and those that serve teachers. So that being said, though, I think to your point that you were making, you were getting to, we want to see this implemented in every single elementary school we have. Okay, so I think again the point is we're not just saying we want to have on grade level reading by third grade. Y'all make it happen. Well, how about some help? Hey, here's the goal. Make it happen. You're the teacher. Go get it done. That's not the way we roll. So when we said, okay, on grade level reading by third grade, and this initiative, to your point about proof of concept, we're proving the concept that with innovative creative thinking, you can accomplish much more without any additional funds. Okay, so now that's not to say CTLS was without any additional funds, because obviously you got to have money to create something like that. But the wherewithal, the inner workings of it, when you're looking at the early literacy initiative, is that without some kind of focus, you're literally throwing the teachers to the wolves. To say you expect a teacher to improve the academic performance of the students in his or her class without providing them the appropriate tools to do something differently, then how can you expect a different outcome than the previous years within that classroom? So the point is that, again, going back to my earlier statement, we are thinking outside the box. And we're proving the concept that when you do so appropriately, and that's not, coming up with craziness, but when you do so appropriately, you can garner results of what we're seeing here. You can accomplish goals of on grade level reading by third grade. And again, you have to make sure that you're creating the environment and creating the tool in such a way that it does benefit the teachers. Because if you're coming up with the most complex system of improving literacy and nobody can do it, then it doesn't matter what that theory is. It's not replicable, and it's not achievable. So it's a combination. And again, when I was talking about to Mr. Morgan, I made the offhand remark about it's locally developed. The benefit of locally developed is, number one, to Jennifer's point, you get teachers from all areas of the county to create these assessment items that are geared toward the standard, but it's tremendous buy-in for teachers when you have been able to create said assessment and assessment items that maybe your next door neighbor is participated in this creation of this item. So it's just a well-oiled machine that is simply getting better each day that goes by, and we anticipate that these type of results will be rolled out to every single class and every single school.
What he said. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Camhorn. Mr. Ragsdale, board agenda items.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Agenda item number one. You know what? Let me hit pause just for 1 second. I really appreciate the board, number one, entertaining this conversation for as long as we did, because this is what we're about, and you can't get much more important than teaching kids to read. So I know we went long, but I appreciate the time, and I definitely appreciate the attentiveness of the board to this very important topic. Not that this is less important, but the disposal of property is agenda item number one. Comparatively speaking, is much less important, but you've received the list, and I think we're being asked to take a break.
Yeah, that's. I was going to make that suggestion. We could take a break. It'd be great.
I can accept that. We'll take a 10-minute break and come back at 4:20.
Awesome.
Officially. Is that a yes? We're live. We are reconvened. Do I have a motion to reconvene? Do we need that? Without objection, we are reconvened. All right.
All right,
Now it's time for board agenda. Mr. Ragsdale?
Yep, Mr. Board, members of the, I'm sorry, Mr. Board. Hey, I'm getting ahead of myself. Come on. If y'all hadn't took a break, I'd have been right on cue, but you took a break, so now I've got to recombobulate here. All right. Agenda item number 1. Mr. Chair and members of the board. This is the monthly occurring item for disposal of school district property. The list has been emailed to you electronically, and so be happy to answer any questions.
Consent without objection.
All right, agenda item number 2. I'm going to ask Mr. Brad Johnson to come and bring this agenda item.
Is a recommendation for approval of a loan for Osborne High School band uniforms. In accordance with Board Policy DI, Fiscal Counting and Reporting, a program is available for assisting high schools with the purchase of items for curricular and extracurricular activities, such as marching band uniforms. Osborne High School is requesting a loan in the amount of $50,000 to be repaid over the next 5 years. The superintendent's recommendation is to approve the loan for Osborne High School band uniform. Mr. Chairman, this agenda item is presented for consideration by the board.
Discussion, consent? Consent.
All right, we'll ask Mr. John Adams to come and bring agenda items number 3 through 7.
Thank you, Mr. Superintendent, Mr. Board. Oh, gosh, I'm doing it now. And let me, Mr. Morgan's not here, but let me take the opportunity to apologize on behalf of my friend and colleague, Brad Johnson. He was a little distracted when Mr. Morgan asked him a question, and that's my fault. Brad and I got excited during Jennifer's presentation. We thought that head sprout was a treatment for male pattern baldness. So I apologize. But to the item that you've all really been waiting for, agenda item number 3, recommendation to approve an easement at Bryant Elementary School. This one is pretty straightforward. Southern Company is requesting an easement at Bryant Elementary School, essentially to hook up electricity to the portables. And you see the amount there. This is basically so they can hook up power to a new pole and lines to 2 additional portables at Bryant at no cost to the district.
Any discussion, consent? Consent, item 3.
Thank you. Agenda item number 4, recommendation to phase out Teasley Elementary School's gymnasium and Skyview's school facility in pursuant to essentially clearing up the Georgia Board of Education Facilities inventory plan. In looking at the Georgia Board of Ed's facilities inventory plan, we noticed a few items we needed to clean up. This is essentially to help us comply with some bureaucratic requirements. As you know, Teasley has received a new gym facility, and we have changed the use of Skyview now for administrative and special program use, but that had not yet been reflected in the Georgia Board of Ed's facilities inventory plan, and this merely allows us to execute a document that officially cleans that up in their database, essentially. I'm available for any questions.
Questions or consent? Consent, item 4.
Agenda item number 5, recommendation to modify a portion of the previously submitted FY 2019 state capital outlay application. As you know, we submit state capital outlay applications in advance. This is an instance where we have to make a couple of small adjustments to our previously submitted one in order to keep that document in compliance. Again, and I don't mean it in a pejorative sense, but for some bureaucratic requirements with the folks of the state, and this is obviously at no cost to the district.
Discussion, consent. Any question? Item 5 is consent as well.
Yes, sir. Agenda item number 6, recommendation for the approval of a board resolution certifying the FY 2020 state capital outlay project application. This is our newest in the next wave of capital outlay project applications that we submit to the State Department of Education. It's time for us to do it again this year. The projects that we anticipate completing in 2020 for which we would receive some potential capital outlay reimbursement from the state. Of course, as you know, we wouldn't get that money until the back end after the project has been completed, and then we send it into the state and we'll eventually get reimbursed. But this is for fiscal year 2020. We anticipate, and it's an estimate, receiving the dollar amount you see there, just over $288,000 for the projects that we anticipate completing in 2020. As you may recall, there's a pretty complex formula as to what we receive for what, but we don't get dollar for dollar reimbursement, and we only get reimbursed ultimately for classroom replacements. But this is to prepare and submit our newest document and maintain that timeline with them for next year. I'm available for any questions.
Consent or discussion?
Just a quick question. We've asked this before, but I want to make sure we're on the record again. The capital outlay funds comes back into our general fund, correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Consent.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Ms. John?
Yes, sir.
Consent with everybody? Item 6 is consent as well.
And then agenda item number 7, recommendation for approval of an intergovernmental agreement, or IGA, between Cobb County Board of Commissioners and the Cobb County School District for roadway improvements at Lewis and also on New Macklin Road at McEachern. You may recall in the past we've had some projects that we do in conjunction with the Board of Commissioners. In this case, similarly, the Board of Commissioners has 2 significant road improvement SPLOST projects, one near Lewis Elementary School where you see they're putting in a roundabout nearby. That project's total cost should be about $2 million. And then you have a $1.7 million project, driveway road improvements, but also along with it some driveway and sidewalk improvements on our property. Essentially what we're doing here is they're building large projects nearby or at these schools. We are agreeing to eventually pay when invoiced and after the work is inspected by us and done to our specifications, work that they're also going to do on our property, sidewalk improvements, entrance improvements. And again, in the case of Lewis, it's about a $2 million project, and you see the dollar amount that we will eventually pay to the Board of Commissioners, $6,785. And in the case of McEachern, it's a $1.7 million project on their end, and we're going to reimburse them for just over $58,000. We achieve a good bit of economy of scale. To do these projects on our own would cost significantly more than this. So this is a good deal for the district at fairly small cost. So I'm available for any questions.
Consent, discussion?
Well,
We all,
this is coming out of SPLOST money.
is it-
313.
Should be all.
Pardon?
We can consent.
you want,
Don't we always vote on SPLOST money?
It's moves.
Yeah.
item number 7 will be for discussion.
Thank you. And I believe we have another.
All right, so agenda item number 8, I'm going to ask Mr. Brad Johnson to come and start this agenda item.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, members of the board, Mr. Superintendent, agenda item number 8 is a recommendation to utilize general fund reserves for the continuation of an existing instructional technology project. The district is currently implementing interactive classroom flat panel screens in school classrooms as part of an instructional technology initiative. Approval to temporarily utilize general fund reserves until SPLOST 5 revenues are available next year for reimbursement will enable the district to maintain the progress of this project for a projected completion date of next year. Replacing outdated technology such as overhead projectors, etc., will save the district an estimated $400,000 a year associated with the maintenance of existing audio and visual equipment. Flat panel screen installations in the months of September 2018 through January 2019 would utilize these funds at a cost of $6.5 million. The general fund will be reimbursed next year when SPLOST 5 revenues are available. For the board's consideration, the superintendent's recommendation is to approve the utilization of general fund reserves for interactive classroom flat panel screens to be reimbursed from SPLOST 5 revenues next year. Mr. Chairman, This agenda item is presented for consideration by the board.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Mr. Sweeney?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Johnson, just to make it clear for the public, I know some people had raised some concerns. It seems as if they were spending money out of reserves, which is a short-term proposition, but those funds are going to be reimbursed directly from the SPLOST revenue that we received, and those revenues commence in January of 2019. Is that correct?
Right, they'll be spent in the general fund and therefore reimbursed from SPLOST 5 all in the same fiscal year.
Correct. So it's a short-term withdrawal from the reserves, but it will be replenished.
It'll be replenished within the next 4, maybe 5 months.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Any other questions? Mr. Banks?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I got a few questions about how many replacements will take with this 6.5 million replace? How many is it? Whiteboards and projectors, or is it just the whiteboards?
Mr. Banks, I shrunk a couple inches, I think, and grew a head of hair. If I can take the answer to that question. And before I do, I think it's just important to note, as our CFO just noted, this is not new dollars. And so before I bring up maybe our Senior Executive Director of Technology, Mark Smith, to answer your specific question, I just think it's an important note to come back to. These are not new dollars that are being asked for. This is instead funding which would allow the continuation of this project to be on schedule and on time. In addition to that, this is a project that will save the district approximately $400,000 as we replace 3 old pieces of technology that currently have maintenance and service fees associated with them, with 1 new piece of technology that won't. And so I'll ask Mark Smith to come and speak to your specific questions in terms of timeline and scope.
Okay.
Yes, sir. Thank you. As far as what we look to replace with that, currently, to date, we're approximately 1,000 interactive flat panels have been installed across 14 sites. That's 12 elementary, 1 middle, and 1 high. And moving forward, that will be an additional approximately 1,100 panels across 20 elementary schools.
Well, that's not ever elementary school then?
No, sir. No, sir. This just gets us through the end of the calendar year, through December. So that keeps the project moving forward in the immediate future here.
Okay, so when we designate a elementary school, all the panels will be replaced in that school, not?
Correct.
It won't be cherry-picked?
Correct. It'll be a total refresh for the per site.
Okay, now, is this just one phase, or is it multiple phases as far as replacing all of them eventually?
Yes, sir. Phase 1 is let's get through the elementary schools, so we are looking to continue that on with the remaining 32 elementary schools at the first of the year, with the completion by July 31st of next school, before next school year.
Okay, are we not having the same issues at the middle and high schools?
Yes, sir. Those phases will pick up once we get the completion of elementary. We will then lead toward starting to the middle and then the high.
Okay, so are we saying that the middle schools and the high schools are functional until we get to the point of replacement?
They are functional. We maintain today all the existing solutions out there, and we will continue to maintain those moving forward and work toward the district-wide refresh.
Okay, one final question. What are we doing with the old whiteboards and projectors?
The old equipment is utilized for multiple things. We utilize some of that equipment to maintain, support the portables across the district, maintain the existing solutions in the schools that are on the old solution. So we'll continue to use that equipment, maintain what we have. Ultimately, in the end, what we have left will go to surplus.
Okay, I thought that was the last question, but I do have one more. How will this affect our bandwidth?
We have significant bandwidth. There'll be no additional hit to that, we're good.
Okay, well, the bandwidth, is it restricted to the actual school, or is it a district-wide bandwidth?
Our district as a whole is in great shape.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Banks. Mr. Scamahorn?
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair.
You're welcome.
I want, for the benefit of the public, I want to drive home a couple pieces of information. We're replacing 3 pieces of equipment with the new whiteboard. What are the 3 pieces of equipment?
We have the projectors, the interactive boards, and the sound system.
Oh, say that again.
The projector in the classroom, the interactive board in the classroom, and the sound systems.
In the sound,
classroom.
okay. Now, the other thing, the projectors are really, and correct me if I'm wrong, they're really pretty high maintenance because those bulbs burn out on a regular basis, not just periodically. And what are those bulbs cost per bulb?
It is significant cost to maintain them. I don't have the exact cost of the bulb, but
Ballpark, I don't mean to put you on the spot. I just want to make sure that we're going to get a
I think it's
bang for
about
our
$100 a bulb.
Yeah.
It depends
Yeah.
depends on the unit.
So,
it could be short throw. It could be the standard throw. Cost varies.
Okay. That, the exact dollar amount. So anywhere between $100 and $300 per projector. And the meantime between failure is really, I don't know, what, 6 months to a year, 2 years? What I know it seemed like we used to replace ours pretty regularly when I was in the schools.
Yeah. I mean, it's a never-ending battle to maintain the old solution.
There you go.
That's part of where we utilize the refreshed equipment that we're pulling out of the schools that have received the refreshes. We're utilizing that equipment when we can, maintain everything possible.
Plus, that $100, $300 just for the bulb, that doesn't cost, that's not the expense of sending out a technician that has to get up there on a ladder to get that bulb changed, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Mr. Superintendent, you have anything else to add? I want to drive home that this is really a significant cost savings to the public.
Yeah, I think I'll just reiterate what you just said. I mean, we're replacing 3 systems with 1. So the interactive flat panel, basically it's similar to what we have in the boardroom. The replacement of that is just if you've been to Walton, Brumby, East Cobb Middle, it makes for a much cleaner install in the classroom. But it also it's a cost savings in the long run because this technology is going to last. It has a much longer life cycle than the traditional projector and speakers with an amp and all of that kind of stuff that's in the classroom. Which the only thing I will add, when construction is done in a school, in an existing school, this solution is much more conducive to having a successful implementation of that construction because there's a significant amount of dollars that are spent in a modification of a school building, such that if you go in and we have an HVAC project and the ceiling has to be taken down in a classroom, that means the projectors has to be deinstalled, the speakers have to be deinstalled, and generally the interactive whiteboard to a degree has to be deinstalled. Then after the project's done, you have to go back and reinstall all of that. That's significant funding that's being utilized on something that has to be done, but yet now we'll be in a position to be able to actually recoup that money. So that being said, moving forward in the long run, it's a savings of millions of dollars.
Yeah, thank you. And that's really, and again, I'm not trying to put you on the spot per se. Oftentimes, we do things for efficiency. In Cobb County, I will commend the staff from the superintendent on down. We look for efficient ways, whether it's academics or maintenance and operations or innovation is whatever. And I just think we need to tell that story, where, hey, we may be spending a little, but we're saving you more.
Yes, sir.
So, and generally, last question is, and you may not know this, I'm not sure myself, but how long have projectors and interactive whiteboards been in our schools? 30 years? 20? 10?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, it's been long. We had projectors.
All right, you're dragging me into this now. So there were no interactive whiteboards in the district when I came in 2006.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow, I thought it'd been longer than that.
But now that being said, we were behind in the implementation of that technology.
Okay.
Once we put it in Cobb, pretty much every other metro district had that technology already installed. So we were a little bit behind in that. So
My second final question. Thank you, Mr. Superintendent.
yeah, I don't know who the technology guy was back then, but I don't know. He must have done a pretty good job. I don't know.
We find him, we'll run him off. Is it cost effective once we get through or get near the end of our conversion, if I can call it that? Is it cost effective to sell our whiteboards and our projectors? And we may be doing this to other school districts that can't afford, the top of the line, or not that we're top of the line, but the innovative technology that we're getting. Is it?
Well, I believe unfortunately a lot of that equipment by the time we get to that point has been deemed non-valuable, so
Okay.
we definitely sell off what we can, surplus what we can, and dispose of the rest. But it'll all run through the process.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Camhorn. Discussion, consent. Any questions? We'll go to consent.
Well, we're talking, again, we're talking about splash money.
You're going to vote on the consent agenda, so it's up to the board.
Discussion.
Ms. Gordon, there'll be discussion.
Proceed.
Go ahead, Mr.
Thank
Adams.
you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, Mr. Superintendent. I bring you agenda item number 9, my final item for this afternoon, recommendation for approval to award a contract for the new gymnasium at Lassiter High School. In accordance with SPLOST 4, Lassiter is scheduled to receive a new gym. We're recommending that you award the contract at this time to RK Redding Construction out of Bremen, Georgia, and authorize the superintendent to execute the contract. That'll allow us to begin work in October with an estimated substantial completion date of November 2019. We had 5 proposals in this instance, and the bids ranged from 15 to 17 million. We're recommending that you award it to RK Redding in the amount you see there, $15.66 million. Although the SPLOST 4 planning estimate was only $10.8 million, as we've discussed many times before, that's first of all, a planning estimate only. That is not relevant to any specific design, and that was made in 2012. A couple of factors have changed since they made those estimates in 2012. Back in 2012, when the estimate was made, our standard spec as a district for a gym was 2,500 seats. As you're aware now, it's now 3,000. So that's a 20% increase. And then we've had about 6% a year construction inflation every year since then, in the 6 years since 2012. So you've had about cumulatively another 24, 25% inflation since that time. You put those two factors together and you scale that number, the $10.8 million number, up by 20% for size, 25% additionally for inflation, and you get to about $16.2 million. You see the architect estimate was 16.6, and we're recommending you award it in the amount of 15.66. So we think this is a good price for this gym and going to result in an excellent result and an excellent product for the good folks at Lassiter as budgeted in SPLOST 4. And I'm available for any questions.
Questions? Ms. Thayer.
Thanks, Mr. Adams. Can you tell us, is this gym going to be any different from those, our standard gym that's built in every high school?
All gyms are a little different. They're kind of like your children in that no two are exactly alike. So all gyms have different challenges, different needs, in the sense that you may need a different configuration at Lassiter compared to some others. We had some issues at Lassiter with soil. We had some difficulties with topography because it's not as flat as some areas. And you had to, in Lassiter's case, it had to be essentially, fit into a parking lot in a certain configuration relative to the school. So they're all a little different. So none of them are cookie cutter. No two are exactly alike. But they all meet our standard spec for the district. They're all going to be 3,000 seats. Everyone in the district will have an excellent, equitable gym.
Thank you.
Mr. Scamhorn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Is this a replacing a gym, or is this a new gym?
This is, as it said in the notebook, this is a replacement of their oldest of the two gyms. We had to demo the older of the two gyms and replace it.
Okay. And will this gym contain any new classrooms?
This gym does have a small number of new classrooms that will enable us to capture a little bit of capital outlay for that. I believe they're health and PE classrooms. Don't swear me exactly to that, but a small number of classrooms.
Okay. I might, with your consent, might talk to you a little bit about that later if I can.
Be glad to.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Let's go with this discussion for this one. If there's no more questions, discussion. So we'll have the first 6 items are consent. The last 6, 7, or 7, 8, 9 are discussion. We now have the approval of the agenda, and if there's no objection, our agenda is approved. And I need a motion to go to executive session to discuss personnel, land or legal? Both?
Personnel and land.
Personnel and land. Do I have a motion? Mr. Sweeney? Ms. Thayer, second. Anybody oppose, or is there any discussion?
Just make it all 3.
Mr. Chair, I make a recommendation we go to executive session to discuss land, legal, and personnel.
Second. Discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries 7-0. We are now in recess, and we'll return at 7 o'clock.